Hi, I'm Roxanne Richardson, and this is the Casual Friday podcast. In this week's podcast, I have an amazing gift from a viewer. I'm going to give you a studio tour because I've made some significant changes recently, and I'm going to give you an update on my handspun sweater project. So let's get started. So last Casual Friday, 2 weeks ago, I was telling you about my trip to Maryland Sheep and Wool. It was my first time going, how much I enjoyed it, and that I was able to try out a couple of different e-spinners. I hadn't expected to do that. I just hadn't thought about the fact that this is such a large festival that there would be e-spinner vendors there. So e-spinner is something I'd been thinking about for a couple of years. It's something that I might want to have. I'm not an obsessive enough spinner to be like, oh, I want all these different wheels, for different purposes. I am a spinner. And so I didn't really know that I wanted a second wheel. But if I got a second wheel, it seemed like an e-spinner would be good because you could travel with it. They're smaller. You could take it like our spinning group in the summer times, they meet at a park. So it'd be a lot easier to take, even though my Lendrum folds up and there's a case for it, like a backpack style case. It's still, I have to take it apart, fold it up, haul it there, unfold it, put it back together. And so, some people just bring an e-spinner and it's just so much easier. But they tend to cost about the same as a treadle wheel. So I was surprised and delighted that I was able to try out a couple of e-spinners, and the one that I really loved was the Handspun mini spinner. They have two. They have a classic and a pro. And the pro was sort of outside of the price range that I was thinking I would want to spend on an e-spinner. But the classic was more in line, and especially the kind of spinning that I do, that would have been fine. But he didn't have them there, so I couldn't impulsively buy a classic. But it gave me something to think about. And he said there's no waiting period. You order it online and they ship it out within a couple of days. And so I would be able to get it as soon as I wanted it. So, I had this feeling in my head like that there was something other big ticket item that I was thinking about or that I'd already bought. I was like, what was it? And then I realized when I got home, oh, it was the cover stitch machine I'd been thinking about because I've been sewing lately. And so it was like, oh, do I want to buy a third sewing machine or a second spinning wheel, which is kind of, very first world problems. But the big problem was I didn't have room for a cover stitch machine. So I was trying to think about where I would even put that. And even with an e-spinner, how would I store that? So when I got back from Maryland Sheep and Wool, I thought, well, I think I'm going to get a cover stitch machine. There supposedly is going to be a Memorial Day sale at the place where I would get it. And this, for those of you not in the U.S., this weekend is Memorial Day weekend. Monday is Memorial Day. And so a lot of times when holiday weekends, their stores will have sales. So I was thinking that maybe I'd get one on Memorial Day weekend, but I needed to have a place to put it. And so I started thinking about reorganizing my room here and figuring out how to do that. So I've been in this office for 3 years now, a little over 3 years. And every so often I reorganize things or I redo things or I figure out how to make things work better. The knitting side, this side of the room, and the video side, pretty much the same way it was when I moved in because I knew how I want that organized. But it was getting the spinning equipment and the sewing equipment in this room that was a little harder because I never had really had a space for that stuff. It was just kind of spread out in random places. And so I didn't really know how to figure that out. And so over time, I've, as I've done more sewing or more spinning, figured out, what would work. And so I figured out this corner that is across from where I am was kind of used for storage related to knitting, storing things that I didn't really use, but I just held on to. So I do kind of cull my stash about every year, but that was the stuff that just kind of kept hanging out. And you know, sometimes I buy a yarn for a project and then that yarn doesn't work out, so I have to get a different yarn. And so then I have this yarn, and so I put it on that shelf. And then I periodically clear them out. So what I decided to do was get rid of that bookcase and then turn that into a room, a place where I could have another sewing machine. And so that was kind of what was on my mind when I got back from Maryland Sheep and Wool, with the idea that the e-spinner is still a possibility in the future. The day after last Casual Friday was when our local festival, Shepherd's Harvest, was. And I was scheduled to work at the Knitters Guild booth on Sunday, which is Mother's Day. My friend Elizabeth, who's the one who kind of nudged me really back into spinning last summer, she went on Saturday. I was busy all day Saturday, and when late in the afternoon, I was checking emails and stuff, and she texted me and said, oh, I just got back from Shepherd's Harvest, and such a vendor has a used Handspun mini spinner for sale. And he just didn't vibe with it, so he's going to sell it. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And he was selling it for like $400. And my assumption is that it was a classic, not that it was a pro, because that's a very deep discount for a classic sells new, or a pro sells new, about $1,600 at the low end. And he was selling this for $400. So I figured this has got to be a classic. And so my plan was to get there first thing on Sunday, track him down and see if he still had it, if he hadn't sold it on Saturday. And I'm not kidding you, like 10 minutes later, I got a direct message on Ravelry from somebody who said, oh, I saw your Casual Friday. I am downsizing in order to move into a retirement community. And I already decided that I'm not taking my Handspun mini spinner with me, so I would like to give it to you. You have given me so much over the years. I've learned so much from you, from your videos and your everything. And I was just like, wow, that's amazing. She goes, let me know if you want more information. I can send you details. I messaged her back. I'm absolutely interested. And I said, you know, I just heard about a used one at Shepherd's Harvest. I was going to go tomorrow morning and see if you still had it, and I was going to buy it, but I'd rather buy yours from you. And she said she was going to give it to me, but I didn't want to assume that she actually meant give it to me, because that's a lot to give to somebody. And I hadn't heard back from her the next morning when I was leaving for Shepherd's Harvest. So I messaged her again and said, let me know if you still want to offload that, because I'm heading out to Shepherd's Harvest. And so she texted me back, absolutely. And I meant this as a donation, not for you to buy it from me, but I would want you to pay for shipping, and the shipping is going to be expensive because I would have it professionally packed. She just didn't want to go through all the hassle of trying to sell it online and do all that. And she knew that I would be an appreciative recipient of it, which I absolutely would be. A couple of days later, she shipped it off and sent me the receipt for the shipping. And so I sent her PayPal with the shipping plus the amount that I would have paid the vendor at Shepherd's Harvest, because what she was sending me was a mini spinner Pro, not a classic, a mini spinner Pro with a bunch of accessories, including an external battery and car charger. And it was so much. I'm so appreciative of it. And I'm still getting a real bargain. It's amazing. So we were both happy with the arrangement. And so I received it a couple of days later, very excited. And she also sent me, in a second package, a bunch of fibers, like a combed top of 10 different breeds. So she knew I had done a breed study before, and maybe some of these were repeats, but she thought that I might be able to use them, and if I couldn't, then I would know somebody I could give them to, which is absolutely true, because my spinners group, there's always people. 150 grams, or about 5 or 6 ounces of each one of these breeds. So significantly more than the amount that I had when I was doing my breed study. I had a little 1 ounce samples of 30 different breeds, and these are significantly larger. So these are large enough to do like an actual project with. So that's pretty amazing And I want to show you what this looks like. I've been playing with it, trying to play with it every day to get used to it, and trying different spinning techniques. I want to get used to it before I dive into something like this, the fiber that she sent me for the breed study, the different breeds, so that I kind of know what I'm doing. So this is the comb top that Jean sent me. So we've got a really lovely selection. We've got Teeswater, White-Faced Woodland, Herdwick. We've got Corriedale, and this is a really interesting Corriedale because it is a beautiful gray. And the Corriedale that I've spun before has been just white. Black Welsh Mountain, which is just so dark. I wonder if it's the darkest of the black sheep, because I feel like in my breed study that I did before, it was the darkest. Manx Lochtan, which is one of my favorites. I just love these sheep. They have crazy amounts of horns. Gotland, which is also lovely. Perrindale. This is the one I haven't spun before, Shropshire. And then we've got Targhee Top. So they're all wonderful, and I love that there's a mix of whites and colored wools. I love colored wools. And so I'm not sure how much of this I'm going to spin myself and how much of it I'm going to see if one of my spinning friends might like some of this. So let's go to the overhead, and I can show you this fantastic gift from Jean, and I am so grateful. It's so amazing. This is the box that Jean sent me, and everything was bubble wrapped inside of it. But this is fantastic because the spinner itself and all of its accessories can fit inside of this. So there's a little top flap here where there's a couple of orifice hooks. If you don't know what that is, I'll show you in a bit. Inside are all of the bits and pieces. So this is the foot pedal. You don't have to use it under your foot. It plugs into the front of the mini spinner right here. And this allows you to turn it on and off with your foot, or you could have it on your lap, and you could have it near your elbow and turn it on and off. You could have it right by your hand and just press it like that. In the front, there's a speed knob. So if you want a consistent speed, you don't want to be turning it on and off, by doing this. You want to maintain your speed and be able to turn it on and off here. Now it's not turning on and off because there's no power hookup right now. So you have a couple of choices. One is that you can plug it into a wall and then plug this here, and then it will work. Or you can use an external battery pack. And so they don't sell the battery packs with the mini spinner. You have to buy that yourself. So this is the power pack that she sent me, and it's got all of these different attachments. You can use your car charger to charge up the battery. I actually don't know if you could use the car charger to actually run the spinner. I haven't obviously tried that yet, but you can recharge it so that, if you don't have an electrical outlet, that you can still use your external battery. And so this is what a lot of people do when they're going to retreats or like go to the park or whatever. You don't have some place to plug it in, so you have a battery. So that has been really great. So when I sit at my desk, I can use the battery, or I can reach the plug over and do that. I can do either one. So I've been kind of switching back and forth to kind of just get myself familiar with all of that. Then there's this, what they call maintenance kit that the mini spinner comes with. So it has a couple of different parts, things for cleaning it out. They have what they call orifice reducers. So when I talked about the orifice, this is the orifice right here. So if you're doing really thick yarns, you need a thicker, a bigger opening. But if you're doing thinner yarns, you don't want the yarn necessarily bouncing around. So you have an orifice reducer. One of the really nice things about this is how huge these bobbins are. This is the bobbin for my Lendrum, and it holds, a decent amount of spun fiber on here, but look at the size of this one. It's just enormous, so it can just hold just a ton. And one of the nice things about the Pro is that as your bobbin fills up, it's going to keep maintaining the same speed for spinning, adding the same amount of twist in your fiber. Because when you are spinning with a treadle, as this gets more and more full, it gets harder and harder to actually treadle. So that can be a challenge. So with something this big, that's pretty amazing that it can hold that much. You put the bobbin on. This is the brake. And then that's all in there. So this is your leader right here. It gets threaded through here and here. And then this is what an orifice hook is for. So this thread has to go down here and then out here. And so you use this little hook. It comes up here. And I can push that through there and then just pull it through here. And so now it's ready to go. So let me get a little bit of fiber ready. So I can just use my hand here to get it going. And it's going to start. So you push the button and it takes it slows down gradually over the course of a few seconds. I've got too much spin in here, too much twist. Might need to tighten the brake a little bit so that it will wind down faster. Well, you can't see me actually spinning. I've got my hands out of camera or drafting. There. Yeah, I needed to adjust the brake a little bit so that it would pull in more. It was accumulating too much twist too fast. Well, I can't get my hands in here. I have to be so close to the orifice for you to see my hands. But this is the Handspun mini spinner, and it works great, just as Jean promised. And she also promised that I would love it, and I do. It's wonderful. I'm going to have a really fun time spinning up fiber and dyeing fiber this summer and really playing with this e-spinner. I've got plans for Tour de Fleece already, thinking about what it is I'm going to be doing for the month of July. Because I anticipate getting a cover stitch machine in the near future, and because I now am the proud owner of an e-spinner, I really needed to kind of get things sorted out in my space here. So I want to give you a room tour of how things are right now. Now, this is not a Pinterest worthy room. I am function first, form second, maybe. like I like things to look nice, but it's not as important to me as it is that it's functional. And for me, that means things have to be on the wall, on a shelf, or in a drawer. And I really prefer that the drawers be semi-transparent at least. I am very much out of sight, out of mind. It doesn't exist if I can't see it. A lot of people have trouble with visual clutter. I do not. I have trouble with clutter when it actually physically interferes with me, but it doesn't ever usually interfere with me concentrating or focusing on what I need to do. The room is not perfect. It will never be perfect. It will always be evolving. There are certain problem areas in it that I just haven't figured out the right solution yet. So that usually is my main issue, is I can see where the problem is. I don't know how to solve it. And so, gradually over time, I get things figured out. And then there's areas where, I'm 90% there and I just want to use the room, and that stuff that I need to sort out is stuff I don't care that much about, which probably means I don't need to keep it, but I just haven't gotten to that point yet. So I want to give you a tour of what this room looks like, because you guys normally just see this angle, or you see an overhead angle when I'm filming for my videos. So I want to give you a little tour. Some of you may have seen this when I first moved into this room. 3 years ago, but it's changed a bit. And so I want to show you what it looks like now. So let's go. All right, to the left is a wall. I have some, this is the only place I really can put artwork is on this wall, and these curtains are actually moving blankets. They're hanging from a curtain wire. When I first moved into this office, there wasn't enough soft things, so there was a lot of echo, and so I had those curtains. Now there's more yarn and fabric and fiber and everything, so I tend to keep them open. So this table has been sort of an all-purpose table. I will put my drum carder on it if I need to use it, or I would bring my sewing machine out or my serger. And what I realized in February when I started sewing is that I could have both my serger and my sewing machine out at the same time on this table. This is a table from Costo. You can raise it to 3 different heights, so it's at a nice low height for sewing. Just the past couple of months, I put this pegboard up. I moved some of the artwork around in order to put this pegboard up. And this has been really great so that the tools that I use while I'm sewing, or that I need while I'm sewing were on this pegboard. And, you know, as I used them, I put them in this little black tray right here. But it was a great place to store them because as soon as I needed them, I could reach for them. So that's been really helpful. This is a closet where I keep spinning related things and sewing related things. Mostly this table here on the left is it's on rollers, and it can fold out into a really large size surface for cutting out fabric, things like that. And so I have this little floor space here where that would occupy. But of course, if that's open, there's very little room to move around and get it at other things. But I have my drum carder stored there. I've got a lot of sewing notions. And then in this corner is where I have my LINNMON stored and the sort of travel bag if I need to go somewhere. All the bobbins and various spinning supplies are there. So this is the new corner. This corner is, I've just done in the past week or two. And I've moved my sewing machine onto this table. Originally I was thinking, oh, I'll put a cover stitch machine here when I get that, but it's a larger surface for just sewing, and I felt like that made more sense. And so I put up some more pegboard. I used to have a bookcase here, very much like the one over in that corner. And it held yarns that I didn't really use. It was like, that's why they were stored way over here, is because they weren't things that I was needing, but I thought maybe I would need. So I culled a lot of that, got rid of that bookcase, put up some KALLAX, moved all of my sewing books and my grandma's sewing case there. I've got a blocking pad up there, and I'm keeping my rolled up digital printout patterns in that box above it. So this has turned out really well. I've got a nice task light. This has turned out really well so that when I do get a cover stitch machine, I can have both the serger and the cover stitch machine on the same table, and just, you know, use whichever one. They're going to use the same threads, so that will be really handy. I've got, you know, hanging rulers, things like that on that wall. I've got my filing cabinet where I keep, obviously, files. And this is my desk. This is an IKEA hack of the old EXPEDIT furniture on its side with a tabletop and some casters. And so I keep office supplies. And right now, in the bottom right here is where I've got the case for a new piece of equipment. And I also keep, in the red bin, works in progress, and in the red bin to the right of that. So these two bins right here, this one is whatever I'm currently working on. And then this is yarn I use for swatching when I'm doing Technique Tuesday videos. So that's just swatch yarn. And this corner is the one, this bookcase, that corner. It's got all my vintage pattern booklets, some vintage yarn. It's not really organized yet. I need to kind of go through it and figure it out. But these books are the reference books I reach for most often. So I'm sitting at this, when I sit at this table, I want to be able to reach over and get my knitting notions right out of one of those drawers. get my main reference books there, and then I've got other stitch dictionaries and reference books. Swift up there, ball winder, scale, nitty naughty, all of that stuff is right in reach. And this is something I've changed up a little bit. I had this KALLAX furniture here, but I added those little X storage things, and it's allowing me to store more yarn in those cubes in a way that makes it easier to take those yarns out. And then I have a few blocking pads, a steamer, batteries, chocolate, Kleenex, things on that windowsill right there. And then I've got yarn right here. So I don't have a huge stash. I do have in here, I've got some of the sweaters I made for my vintage project. The ones I wear are downstairs, and in here I've got some self-striping sock yarn. But I really try to keep my stash limited. I have 6 sweaters quantity worth of yarn, and I've got enough fiber to make at least 3 more sweaters, so I have plenty of yarn. And then I also have some yarn stored up here. Part of that is decoration, part of that is echo control. And then I've got the majority of my knitting books here. This bookcase was getting really full, and you can see I've got one that's kind of empty. That was where my sewing books were. I needed to kind of free that up. In the corner, I've got this dress form I use sometimes, and you can see the little white KALLAX. That's a new one that's storing like things that have to do with my audio video equipment, and cords and old external hard drives, stuff like that. And then this wall is things like samples of hats and mittens. It's leftovers. It's a lot of sock yarn solids, but it's a lot of samples and leftovers. So I have to figure out what I really need to keep in all of that. It's a lot to store that I don't ever use. I do take out once in a while and use as an example for video equipment, but I probably have more than I need to keep here. The problem with all the hat samples is I don't knit the hats in superwash, so I can't donate the hats. They always want things that are machine washable. And then here is kind of my video studio. So you can see I've got lights, a couple of different lights. I've got my mic equipment, sound equipment here. This is the surface where I do overhead. So this is I mount the camera on here for overhead. I mount it here for face to the camera. This right here can lift up. I can put an iPad here if I need a teleprompter. A lot of times I don't. Just depends. And then this is the monitor that lets me see what the camera sees. So half of the room is for, let me come over here. So that half of the room is knitting and video. So it's all my knitting and video. And then this half of the room is sewing and spinning supplies. I do have a couple of bins of scoured wool out in the hallway because it doesn't fit in here and I need to work through it. So, so that's how my setup is working now, but I love this corner because it really was just being used to store stuff that I never used. And so now it's turned into something really useful. One thing that I'm really thinking about, and we'll see how things go, I don't want to make any rash decisions, is whether or not I'm going to keep my treadle wheel in the future. Just because it is so difficult to take out and use in this room if I'm doing sewing. If I get to a period of time where I'm not really sewing much at all or not doing it, then I might be able to take it out. So right now it's sitting in that closet, and if it stays in that closet for a long time and never comes out, I might think about selling it. And what's the thing about Lendrums is that Gordon Lendrum decided to retire a few months ago. So they're not making any more of the Lendrum wheels. They're still producing like parts, I think, and accessories maybe. That means that the Lendrum is going to be a desirable item, and I may not want to hold on to it just because there are people out there who might really want to use it and I'm just sitting on it. But again, I've only had the e-spinner for, like a week and a half. So we'll see what happens. We'll see how my spinning works out if I decide that I really prefer the e-spinner and I want to make room in that closet for other things, like the fiber that I currently have stored out in the hallway in big bins because I can't put it in that closet. It's just too awkward. You know, there's certain things that I love. I love my little sewing corner. I love the other table that I have for sewing. I really, really like that, how the sewing half of the room is working out, and it's just still working out the spinning aspect of the room and what's going to work best for that. So an update on my sweater that I'm making from my hand spun, hand dyed yarn. I've got, the body was completed I think last time, and I've got both sleeves complete now. There's no ends woven and everything's dangling. So, and I did an experiment on the button bands. What you can see at the bottom of the cuffs, let me see if I can hold this up so you can see it. So I'm going from light to the darkest right here, and then I have the ribbing, and then I have the darkest right here at the cuff. And so I was thinking about maybe I would do that at the button bands, that there's this special double pickup along the selvage. So it looks hides the selvage on the inside and the outside. It looks very nice on the inside and outside. And that lasts for a couple of rows, and then you switch to the ribbing. And so I was thinking I might do that special double pickup in the dark green, then do the button band, and then do the last few rows in the dark color. Like that might be more, that might look nicer than just picking up in gray and then ending with the dark green. So I did some samples of each one that I will show you when we go to the overhead. So I've tried this on, and it's wearable. I'm going to wear it. I'm going to, for the most part, like it. I'm not in love with the way that the sleeve caps, I think I made the sleeves a little bit too roomy. You know, back in the 80s and 90s, they used to be very voluminous. And nowadays, a lot of people like these voluminous ones, but I really like a more close-fitting one. And I think I just added more ease than I really needed to over a t-shirt. And then the other issue was that in my swatch, my row gauge was 7 rows per inch. But as I was knitting this top-down simultaneous set-in sleeves, you know, with increases and short rows and things going in all the different directions and trying to measure my row gauge, it looked like maybe it was 6.5, but I wasn't sure. And by the time it was long enough for me to really measure, I realized it was 6.5. So I think the armholes ended up being a little deeper than I liked, than I do like. And, you know, when you have a deeper armhole, then what happens when you lift your arms up is that it kind of pulls up the shirt too, or the sweater too. It's fine. And it's my, you know, it's fine. There are a lot of things I learned from this, a lot of things I like about it. It'll be fine. And we'll also see what happens once I have the button bands on. So a lot of people say, oh, the great thing about top down is that you can try it on as you go, but it doesn't always really tell you how it's going to fit. I've got these bunchy sleeves under here of this from this top. So that's not, you know, I've got these sleeves from this top under here, but I always have one shoulder lower than the other. I think it'll be fine. We'll see. It's very warm. It's woolen spun. It's very warm, and it's summer here now, so I'm very hot. But let's go to the overhead, and I can show you some of the little things that I've done in this in the construction, and kind of show you also the button band details and what I'm going to be doing with that. So one of the things that I did when I was planning the sweater was the stripes are 2 rows, and so you know, you join the color at the edge, you work back and forth, and then the gray yarn is where you left it. And so you don't have to keep rejoining the gray yarn. But I didn't want to have all of the yarn tails always on the same edge and the same selvage. So the gray is 5 rows long, so that so that you join a color at this edge, and then the next time you join it at the other edge, and alternating back and forth. There's one that I did wrong, and it has 6 rows somewhere in here, because I was weaving in some ends up here as I was preparing to pick this up, this little sample thing. And I noticed that one of these stripes had 6 rows. And the only reason I noticed it had 6 rows is because I noticed that they were yarn tails, 2 consecutive sets of yarn tails at the same edge. I can't even tell where it is. 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't know where it is. It's somewhere here. It's right here. This is the wider one. These stripes, you know, my spinning isn't that consistent. Sometimes the yarn is thinner and sometimes it's thicker anyways. So the way that this works, well, let me show you on here. So here's the one that I did where I just picked up in gray. So it's kind of rounded right here. You can kind of tell it's a little bit rounded. And if you look on the back side, it looks the same. And so you're picking up, you don't see that selvage because you use a larger needle, like 3 sizes larger, to pick up the stitches along here, and then then you switch to your regular needle to work 3 rows of stockinette, and then you come back on this side and you pick up the purl bumps from that initial pickup row using your regular size needle. And because you use such a large needle for the other pickup, you just have that slack. And then you work 3 rows along this side in stockinette. And so you get this 2-layered stockinette, and you hide that selvage in there, and then you switch to the ribbing. And what I've done at the end is I wanted to also avoid little blips of color. When you switch in ribbing, if you switch from one color to another, you can get little blips of color, and I wanted to avoid that. And the way that you avoid that is that when you work the first row in the new color, you work it in stockinette, and then you switch to ribbing. So I actually have 3 rows here. I have 2 actual rows of knitting, and then I have the chain as the bind off. And I did that because I didn't want to work a row of stockinette and then bind off in ribbing. I thought it might flare a little bit, and that may or may not be true, but that was what I did. So this is a little bit of a wider stripe. These bind off areas are a little bit wider than the others. And that's okay because it's just that edge. It's the edge that makes it wider. So when I picked up here, I had to think about, well, how many rows of color do I actually want to show up? And so I was picking up with the dark color, and then I worked 1 row in, just a purl row in the dark color, and then I switched to the gray. So I have just 2 rows right here, but one of them is that pickup row, which kind of gets buried in here. And so I didn't feel it was wide enough. So what I'm going to do for the real button band is pick up in the dark, then work 2 rows in the dark green, and then I'll work 1 row in stockinette with the gray, and then I'll switch to the ribbing, because that's the other thing is, again, I don't want those blips. So that will make this row a little bit wider, and it will still avoid color blips when I transition to the ribbing here. I'm going to do something slightly different than what I've tested, but I'm fairly confident that the choice I'm making for what I'm actually going to do will work really well. Oh, here's like an example of blips. Like you always see it in the purl bumps. And so on the reverse stockinette side, you see them, and you can see them across here as well. But so that trick only works if there's a right side and wrong side to your work, and so that you can make sure that the right side of the fabric is worked in stockinette when you make that color change. I actually have a video on this, on how you can avoid color blips. I will link to that down below, because I think it's a really great trick, and you don't read this as being a row of stockinette, because what happens in the purl columns is that you just have garter stitch, so that those knit stitches that are right here are receding, which is what happens in garter stitch. So you don't even notice that there's a knit stitch there. It's a great trick. Well, that's it for this week's Casual Friday. If you have any comments or questions about today's video or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.